Good evening. Welcome to you all. We are here and we thank you for joining this special live event that we call a virtual visit. It's really a behind the scenes look at MCC's work. We have people joining on Zoom and via Facebook Live from all across the country. As we were just discussing among the panelists, some of you are just getting off your day at work. Others of you are ending your evenings with us. So greetings to you all. Thank you for your ongoing support of MCC and for your interest in our work. We're thrilled that you're part of the MCC story and thrilled that we can offer you this unique view of the way we serve in the name of Christ. My name is Laura Kelmar, and I serve as MCC Canada's Director of Communications and Marketing. Today, this evening, I will be your host. I'm here in Winnipeg, Manitoba, located on Treaty 1 land. And just naming the fact that I'm on Treaty 1 land reminds me that we all are welcome guests on the land unless we are First Nations or the First Peoples here, and that we have been invited to share this good earth with the First Peoples of this country. So to me, it seems very appropriate to talk about the surprise and delight and sometimes the challenges of welcoming and actually being newcomers here in Canada. I'd like to go over just a few logistics with you before we get started. On Zoom, participants will be kept muted throughout the live event. If you would like to submit a question, and we really do encourage you to do that, we'd love to hear from you. We'd love to hear what your questions are. Please do that via Zoom, and you'll notice at the bottom of your screen there's a bar and there's a Q&A button. Please submit questions through that Q&A function. Again, you can find that on the black bar at the bottom of your screen when you move your mouse or toggle over it with your mouse. People who've joined via Facebook Live are encouraged to submit questions as well. You can do that through the Facebook comments section, and somebody will be monitoring those during this hour. You can submit questions at any time. Not everybody will be able to see them, only the hosts here on Zoom, but we will just keep your questions until after all the presentations have been made, until the presentation portion is over. And then the questions will be moderated, and I will pose those questions to the panelists this evening. We're going to try to address as many of your questions that we can get to, but we may not be able to. We may run out of time, and we might not be able to get to your questions during the event, but please be aware that we're planning to follow up if we don't get to some of those questions live tonight. We do want to make sure that you get your questions answered. Also, just a reminder that we are recording this session. The recording of the event will be made public following this live presentation, so just be aware of that. So, what are we talking about this evening? Well, to introduce this webinar topic, this virtual visit, the surprise and delight of relationships through refugee sponsorship. In this virtual visit, we'll explore the ins and the outs of refugee sponsorship here in Canada. We know that today is World Refugee Day. It marks a really important day that we stop and think about the incredible displacement across the globe in so many places, with tens of millions of people displaced from their homes. It's actually the number is staggering. It's almost twice the population of Canada. So if you can imagine all Canadians and double that displaced around the globe. MCC is pleased to work with displaced people, helping people find ways to go if that's their choice, and find ways to stay if that's their choice. And of course, one of the small ways that we do this is through refugee sponsorship here in Canada, welcoming newcomers, welcoming some of those displaced families to find new homes and new lives here in Canada. So as we discuss that, we're going to hear about some of the surprises, some of the delights of sponsorship, and here's some first-person stories from communities here in Canada. First, we're going to hear from Moses Mullaney. He's MCC's Migration and Resettlement Coordinator for Ontario, who's going to be sharing about his role, what sponsoring a refugee can entail, and really the importance of welcoming the stranger, to understand what our posture is through MCC as we do welcome people, welcoming the stranger in the land, and really finding that as our biblical call as we do this work. Then you're going to hear from Rihanna Teskey and Nadine El-Zubi and Khalil Hamadi, who are a sponsorship group and a sponsored family who are going to tell you a little bit about their story and share a little bit about their journey. You're going to hear some incredible stories of their relationship, and joys and struggles firsthand. Our presenters are going to speak about 7 to 10 minutes each, and then we're going to leave at least a half an hour for questions and conversations with you, those of you in the audience. We want to hear what your questions are. We want to hear from you, and we encourage you to submit your questions along the way, and like I said, we'll answer as many as possible. Well, I'm going to go ahead and open with a video that really defines the way MCC looks at our work with displaced people. Like I said, that work happens across the globe, but also here in Canada. And where do we find our call to do that? How do we find our positioning on supporting people who are displaced, welcoming the stranger? So please take a look at this video for a couple minutes. So that's just a snapshot of what drives us and fuels us as MCC as we walk alongside people on their migration journey at all points of the journey, uh, before they leave, when they're in a, still within their boundaries of their home country, as they leave, as they journey, as they resettle, and sometimes as they go back to their original location. MCC walks through that journey. So you're going to hear a little bit more about that from our presenters this evening. I want to introduce you to Moses Mullaney. He serves as MCC Ontario Migration and Resettlement Program Coordinator. Moses himself resettled to Canada as a refugee from South Sudan in 1992. So Moses, if I'm doing my math correctly, you're celebrating 30 years now in Canada. Moses is passionate about refugee issues, committed to advocacy, and to serve as a voice for refugees and newcomers to Canada. His greatest desire in his role is to continue to seek the engagement of churches in being the hands and feet of Jesus by creating, as we just said, welcoming spaces for strangers. Moses, I want to invite you to present, and then I'll introduce Rihanna and Nadine. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Laura. And yeah, greetings to you all, and thanks for joining us on this World Refugee Day. I am privileged to work with Mullaney Central Committee here in Ontario as the coordinator of the Migration and Resettlement Program. Our response to the plight of refugees is rooted in the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 25, verses 35 to 36. In my work, I collaborate with MCCs across Canada, Mennonite partners assisting refugees and newcomers, as well as other organizations working on refugee issues. One of the greatest joys in my work is to engage and equip churches in being the hands and feet of Jesus as they create that welcoming spaces to provide safety for strangers who have fled persecution and other human rights abuses. In 2015, the Syrian conflict had entered into its fourth year, and the need for the resettlement of Syrian refugees was peaking very fast. It was at that time when MCC received profiles from Immigration, Refugees, and Citizenship Canada for a Syrian refugee family who had been selected for resettlement through the Blended Visa Office Referred Program, BVOR. Unlike the other profiles, this profile included a dad, a mom, a 7-year-old daughter, and another 3-year-old daughter. For the 3-year-old daughter, unfortunately, she had been diagnosed with cancer in Lebanon, and the need for medical attention was urgent. After her parents' profiles was reviewed by a number of other sponsors, Valley View Mennonite Church in London, Ontario, stepped up and made a commitment to sponsor the family. Even before the congregation could make the decision to release some restricted funds, the church pastor embarked on consultation with doctors. In an email I received from the pastor later that week, and I quote, "We have had an excellent congregational meeting this morning, and we have full and strong support from Valley View Mennonite Church to move ahead with this sponsorship. We are excited and ready and trust God to lead us in this act of faith." 3 months later, the sponsorship papers had been submitted to Immigration. The family arrived in Canada, where the little girl received the care she badly needed. And after her treatment, she was declared cancer-free, and she remains so to this day. Praise God. 7 years later, after they arrived, MCs connected with one of their sponsors who had shared their experiences. The year was 2015. Allah, her husband Gary, and a small group of friends and members from their church had just welcomed a refugee family from Syria to settle in London, Ontario. This was Allah's first time involvement with refugee sponsorship. I worked with a really excellent committee, reflects Allah. They were amazing people. It took all of the ingenuity and the skills of the members of the sponsoring group who had to make the newcomers transition to life in Canada as smooth as possible. We received the training and support from MCC, which was wonderful. One thing Allah recognized from the beginning was that for these newcomer refugees, resettling to Canada was their last resort. It is not necessarily the happiest day of their lives, as some may assume. Allah explains, they have lost so much. They have lost their home, friends, family, everything about the previous way of life. The trauma they carry from this and subsequent years living in a limbo as refugees is no small challenge. There have been people who previously were self-sufficient. They could take care of themselves, they could take care of their families, and now they're in a position where they have to ask for help. So as sponsors, one of the most important things you can do is to help restore the dignity that the people have lost. One way to help restore that dignity for newcomers is to ensure successful settlement and integration in order to connect them to the wider community, including the community of the people from their ethnic background, if they wish. As for the family they sponsored, it happened that one day Allah took the girls to the mosque as the parents were unable to attend. Allah's self-consciousness wasn't about what her own neighbors or friends would say, but rather what the people in the mosque would think. Allah recalls the Arabic-speaking interpreter they worked with confessing that she and others in the Muslim community were curious about Allah and her fellow sponsors. Yeah, we wondered about you, said the interpreter. What is the church doing sponsoring Muslims? Months later, they expressed their gratitude to Allah and the group for how much they had done for the newcomer family. Allah, for her part, thought the sponsoring of the Muslim family was only natural. I felt that Christian churches should go out of their way to sponsor people from all religions and denominations. I could see that it was building a bridge between community when we engage in that way. Today, the bridges that were built are as strong as ever. Allah and her husband Gary remain friends with the Syrian family. They celebrate special occasions together, like birthdays and the day the family received their Canadian citizenship. One of Allah's ongoing pleasures is to be invited to the park with the Syrian women and their children to chat, drink coffee, and enjoy each other's company. We welcomed them to our community, reflects Allah, and now they welcome me to theirs. It is wonderful to be a part of their life. Can you hear the joy in Allah's voice? As we see social inclusion take root in communities, we in MCC also rejoice as MCC envisions communities worldwide in right relationship with God, one another, and creation. To conclude, the BVR program through which Allah and her church sponsored the Syrian family through was paused in 2020 for review. In April 2022, the program was relaunched and the Canadian community members will once again be able to sponsor refugees identified from various countries by the United Nations Refugee Agency. This unique partnership between the Canadian community and the government has the potential of bringing an additional 1,000 refugees to safety in Canada. Through the program, the government will support the refugees financially for 6 months, and the sponsoring churches or groups will provide funds for the remaining 6 months of the sponsorship. Throughout the sponsorship year, the sponsors will also assist the refugees with social and emotional support. Though there are challenges in refugee sponsorship, sponsors have also commented that some of their greatest joys have come from the challenges they encountered. Are you ready to experience that joy of sponsoring refugees? Will you consider to welcome a stranger into your community? Get in touch with us by calling your local MCC provincial office. Thanks for spending part of your evening with us. Back to you, Laura.
Wow, Moses, thank you. Like I'm just tearing up with some of those stories that you told. And I think I'd like to come back after the next presenters make their presentation. I want to ask you some questions about the BVOR program, the Blended Visa Office referred program, and say a little bit more. But right now, I'm going to introduce our second presenters. They are Rihanna Teskey and Nadine Alzubi, and oh, I see Khalil there, Hamadi. So Nadine and Khalil have lived with their family in the Zatari refugee camp in Jordan for many years after fleeing the war in Syria. Their friendship with Rihanna actually began through Facebook Messenger and led to the formation of a Calgary constituent group that was set up to actually sponsor the family with MCC. After years of a Facebook friendship, they became real life family when the Hamadi family arrived to Calgary in 2019 as newcomers to Canada. So hand it over to them. They're going to share a little bit about their sponsorship and newcomer journey together. Please go ahead.
Hello.
Hello,
I'm Rihanna
I'm Khalil.
and Nadine. And so as Laura had said, we started out on Facebook, and Khalil and I had talked online almost every day since 2017, actually. And he was sharing his stories of his life in the camp. And I saw him building his life in this uncertainty, and watching his kids growing from afar and building this relationship with them. And then I started to connect with acquaintances even here. And so I became fast friends with people who shared the same heart and the same passion for human rights. And that, I guess, when we're talking about surprises and delights in sponsorship, I think this was my first surprise, to find strangers that had been beside me all along, and then becoming friends with this common goal and inspiring each other to do even more. And so the pictures on this fridge were in the rental when Khalil and Nadine and their family came to Canada, and they were done by some of the youngest members of our constituent group. And Khalil and Nadine had come to us in March of 2019. And we can go to the next slide.
Yeah, here was in the school that I taught there in the camp. I was a volunteer for UNICEF because I was a teacher in Syria. And as you know, we lived like in a camp, and the camp was a desert. And then we started doing some school projects to help the people to forget some the war events that they saw in Syria or they experienced in Syria. And then this was one of the projects that I shared some pictures with Rihanna, and was the next days will be more beautiful. The name of the project. And I was a volunteer, and then I worked like on this project, and then it was very successful. And then I think lots of people that came like from outside of Jordan to visit and then to participate in this project. I left Syria since 2012, and then with because when the life getting worse and then worse, and then I couldn't like continue, and then I decided to leave Syria. And then me and Nadine, we left Syria in 2012, and then I became like a volunteer for UNICEF, and then I taught like for almost 7-8 years in the camp. And yeah, and then because we live in a camp for a long time, and then in a tent, I mean, which was not easy, like for me and my kids. And then after that, I decided to looking for better life for my kids. And then I start like making people a friend on Facebook from all over the world. And then yeah, and then start with the guy. He live in Australia, and he said, Khalil, I did my best. I tried my best, like I couldn't. But and then after that, I randomly like I posted in Calgary group, and then Rihanna, she texted me back, and then she said, "Who are you? I want to know. I want to help." And yeah, that's it. And then Rihanna, she asked me for refugee status, and then I told her I don't know what's that mean. And then she write a note, and then she applied for me again, and then I'm so lucky, and then I get approved now. Yeah,
And we can go to the next slide.
yeah, and then because yeah, I was like, I like agriculture. I start like planting the stuff when I get here in Canada, and then I tried like
So, like,
to, yeah, and then I start planting inside. Yeah,
yeah, so when Khalil got here, we were trying to make things as comfortable as possible, a little bit of an adjustment, I think,
yeah,
different differences in what to do. And I think Khalil went right to like the thing that he knew how to do, right? So in the camp, he was building playgrounds out of recycled materials, and he had pet bunnies for a while,
yeah.
and
That's
birds.
what I did like, when I came here.
Yeah.
Like,
And then he started growing plants, and Nadine, I think, her house was being taken over by all these plants. And so we went to the next thing. You can go to the next slide as well. So when I came over to the house one day, it was a rental, and I discovered that Khalil had ripped out all the front grass of the entire apartment.
that was a
And I almost had a heart attack because I said to Khalil, like, in Canada, you can't do this. The landlord doesn't like that. You're not meant to do that.
because I like to make my house like
He wants to make
beautiful.
his home
Yeah.
wherever he goes. He wants to make it his home. So we compromised. He planted the best grass there ever was in that front yard again.
Yeah.
We planted leafy things in a flower bed that looked like they could pass for flowers. And then we hooked up Khalil with the neighborhood associations with the gardens. So there was a community garden at the
Yeah.
school,
Yeah,
at the
and
kids'
then
school.
outdoor school.
Outdoor.
Yeah, and then
And the community
the community
Mhm.
garden.
So
Yeah,
two- so
with
two-
Magdalene.
two community gardens and the flower beds and along the side of the house, and it still wasn't enough. So Khalil took some materials and he started making little greenhouses. So pictured here, it says, I'll read it here. My neighbors Khalil and his son are newcomers from a refugee camp in Jordan. Their family arrived in March 2019, and he built a greenhouse out of our recycled products like this patio umbrella. And he shares his crop with communities and with the community and neighbors. And so this little greenhouse in the background was the first draft.
Yeah.
And then we can go to the next picture. And then it got to this.
And then here, one of my sponsor, he said he liked my idea, and I told him, promise I'm gonna build a new greenhouse for you. And then he offered me the wood, and he offered me like all the materials, and then I start like me and Nadine and my kids start building, and then he liked to paint it with a yellow. And it's a greenhouse.
It's a yellow greenhouse.
Yeah, a yellow greenhouse.
And so this man pictured with them is another sponsor, Steve, and
I call him Dad.
And he called him Dad. The kids call him
right.
Grandpa. You can go to the next slide. And so Steve actually he worked for Chevron, and they work with they have a community garden for Chevron, and they grow food for the food bank. So Khalil's family, I know, I think it's all year 3 or 4.
This is year 3, yeah.
Year 3 of community gardening for the food bank. And you can go to the next slide. So these are more of our constituent groups. So Steve and some of his kids and some of their kids, and Khalil and Nadine's kids are in there too. And this was this 2019?
Yeah.
2019. And then you can go to the next one. And this is
Yeah, here my kids, like they are very happy with the harvest.
2021.
Yeah.
And so this was another Canadian surprise that we got to kind of navigate that whole experience, was having a baby in Canada. So
Potatoes too.
and potatoes. and this is the littlest member of the Hamadi family. And so we got to go with them through that journey. And then you can go to the next slide. And this was actually this year, just a few weeks ago.
And then Ukrainian family join us.
Yes. So one of the groups, one of the group sponsors here, she also hosted a Ukrainian family short term until they could land on their feet. And so some of them actually came out to the garden
Yeah.
to garden with them group. And you can go to the next slide. So I think when you come back to surprises and experiences, this is some messages of where we started. So Khalil was posting on Facebook about the experiences of the camp, and his hope that it would be better.
Yeah, this is the life in the camp. So that's why my kids, they don't, even they in Canada, they don't like go camping.
Yeah, not yet.
No.
We haven't found a good
They
way to
experience
convince
like,
Nadine.
yeah, they have very bad
that
experience in
camping
the
will be
camping.
good.
Yeah,
Yeah, 9 years is enough.
9 years is enough in a camp.
Right, and then on the right there is my first messages with Khalil. One of our we do the Calgary Immigrant Support Society, and Sima had said, "Can you talk to Khalil? He's been messaging everybody, and,
Yeah.
and he wants to come to Canada, and he's in this camp."
Because the life that I
Yeah.
experienced there,
It's so
so I'm
hard.
looking for like better life for my kids. Better life.
Yeah, and then I'll get you go to the next slide. So that was where we started, and this is kind of where we are, even though this is, I think, a year old, this picture.
Yes, last year.
Yeah, and then the next slide. This is our last one. And this is more members of our constituent group. So we take holidays together
All my sponsors.
and we hang out together. And in fact, tonight when I was coming over, Steve had just come by. And so I think that's been the biggest surprise is just these fast friendships and these really close friendships that have become like family.
Yeah.
And we hope that for everybody, if they're considering becoming sponsors, and if they are already doing it, to start building that closeness, because it's so worth it.
Yeah.
Thanks, Laura.
And I would like
Go ahead, Khalil.
I
Yeah.
would like to thank you, thank MCC for like give me the hope, the life hope again, and then to live me and my kids and my family and Nadine to live like a new life in Canada. And I thanks for all my sponsors. Thank for all the companies. They helped me. They helped my family to be here, to live in a nice life. And thank you very much. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks so much, Khalil and Nadine and Rihanna. And I have so many questions, and I want to ask you about the greenhouse, and I want to know what you're growing. And I think that we should share some recipes back and forth. But what an amazing story. And I think that really captures, like you've all shared, some of the joys and some of the surprises. And I think that one of the things that strikes me when I hear all stories like this is that the media and general public want to create sometimes this idea of fear around welcoming the stranger or having strangers come into your midst. And there's so many unknowns and maybe different customs and different languages. And then you discover all these amazing gifts along the way. You discover community, you discover laughter with each other, you discover these journeys, you discover shared beauty around building a greenhouse and gardening, community gardening, and then continuing to give back through the food bank that you're doing. So just thank you for sharing that incredible story. It's just an honor and a privilege to have you with us here tonight. I have some other questions, but I just invite those of you who are participating this evening, welcome your questions as well. I know that there's some of you who may have had your own experiences as sponsors, sponsorship groups, or some of you may be thinking actually about what it's like to sponsor. I want to go back, Moses. If you want to turn your camera back on, Moses, and yeah, Rihanna and Khalil and Nadine, you can also have your camera on as if you like. I know that there's other family members there, so that's fantastic. But Moses, can you say a bit? I know that through MCC, there's different ways to become sponsorship groups. We have an agreement with the Canadian government as private sponsorship, a private sponsorship agreement with the Canadian government that MCC says that we'll will be the sponsorship holder with that. And groups can then name people who they want to sponsor and bring, which sometimes are people that they know or families of people that they know. But then there's also this blended visa office referred program, this BVOR program that you're talking about, Moses, which is a bit of a different route. Can you say and give us a quick comparison between the two different streams that people can go through? MCC will support people either way, but they're two different sort of journeys. Can you just talk about how those look different?
Yeah, sure, Laura, and thanks so much for that question. Definitely, this is one of the questions that people need to seek a lot of clarity on. Refugees come to Canada through three main streams: sponsored by the government, privately sponsored, and others who fly into Canada and make their refugee claim here. I will focus on the refugee sponsorship from overseas, and particularly with the private sponsorship program, where refugees come here through those two main streams. There is another one, which is joint with the government. So for named, when a church or a group of people mobilize resources and finances together and know of a refugee that they want to sponsor, they can do that, and they can come to MCC and ask MCC, which is a private sponsorship agreement holder with the government of Canada, to undertake that sponsorship. In fact, MCC was the first organization to advocate for the initiation, actually, of the private sponsorship program. The private sponsorship program in Canada is unique, and it has been unique for very, very many years. Now, some countries around the world are learning from the Canadian experience, and they are also starting to engage the general public in sponsorship of refugees. So now, through the private sponsorship program, of course, those refugees can come through the named, where they are identified by either a church or a group of people who put together the monies and the volunteers, and then launch the process of sponsorship from here in Canada. The difference with the BVOI is that this blended visa office referred refugees are refugees who are identified by the United Nations High Commission for Refugees as refugees who are vulnerable and refugees who would not be able to come to Canada because private sponsors do not know who they are, and because in most cases the government quota is also filled up. So the United Nations High Commission for Refugees and then refer those refugees to the Canadian government for sponsorship through private groups. So once they have been identified, the number is around 1,000 now. They've been identified, and then Immigration Canada reaches out to organizations like MCC and a number of other groups and ask them to reach out to their sponsors, to the churches, and to invite them to partner with MCC and the government in the resettlement of those refugees who have been identified. And the identification of the blended visa office referred refugees is because of certain vulnerabilities. Their level of vulnerability is higher compared to others, and then because their process has been completed overseas, their coming to Canada happens very quickly. Prior to the pandemic, we were seeing refugees identified through the blended visa office referred program coming in about 4 months, 6 months. There are other delays that at times do happen, but in most cases, they come into the country very quickly. Because it is blended, the government of Canada chips in some money, and then the private groups also put in some money. And in addition to the monies that the private groups contribute, they also assist with the settlement and integration of these newcomers, welcoming them from the airport, ensuring that there is an apartment that has been rented for them and furnished. And then they are assisted with orientation into the local community, helped with opening a bank account, identifying a family doctor, enrollment of children in school, all those settlement pieces, and connecting them to a settlement agency, including even members of their community, of the background of the refugees here in Canada. So the key differences here is identified by the United Nations High Commission for Refugees and referred to the government of Canada for a settlement. And named is a group from Canada or friends of refugees overseas, naming that refugee and asking MCC to assist them with the sponsorship. In the named sponsorship, 100% of the financial resources are raised by the groups that are undertaking the sponsorship. For the BVOR, it is shared with the government, and there is that, yes, certain percentage that comes from the government for the 6 months, but in most cases, we still ask groups to top up that money a little bit because the funds that come from the government is so small, and in today's market, some of that support from the government cannot even afford to pay for an apartment. So we work with the groups to ensure that we develop a realistic, modest budget for the sponsorship of the refugees. Yeah.
Awesome. And when you talk about the BVOR program, and you say that the UNHCR, so the United Nations High Commission for Refugees, has already identified those families or particular vulnerable groups, and you say that they can come very quickly. Well, I'm just listening to Nadine and Khalil's story of being in a refugee camp in Jordan for literally years and years. So in some ways, there's a difference in speed, because groups that have named refugees to come to Canada could be waiting years and years. And with the pandemic, there was a bit of a backlog as far as I understand. And so there may be a years long wait if you go through that named channel, and maybe just months of wait if you go through the BVOR program. Is that right?
Correct. Correct. But again, another thing we need to remember is that even before those refugees are identified by the United Nations High Commission for Refugees, some of them have already lived in the refugee camp for a very long time. But by the time they are identified and referred to Canada for a settlement, the process actually has been completed. The next thing that is pending is just finding sponsors in Canada who will say, welcome, we will sponsor you, and then they come. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yeah. But so then it could be that the story of whatever family means that they were in a refugee camp for quite a long time.
Yes.
Can I go back to Rihanna and Nadine and Khalil, and thinking about some of the joys and challenges? We had a question submitted prior to the webinar, prior to the virtual visit today, and they were asking, given the overwhelming need of support. Again, we hear statistics from the UNHCR about millions and millions of displaced, tens of millions of displaced people around the globe. We know, we've heard on media about Afghan refugees wanting to come to Canada. We know that 2015 story of an influx of Syrian refugees, Nadine and Khalil's own story. The need is overwhelming. So the question is, what's the criteria beyond funding? So putting together the money to sponsor this family to come, and people power, because you need to have enough people in the sponsorship group to support. What are some of the other things? Maybe Rihanna, I'll ask you, what are some of the things to consider maybe beyond that, getting the money together and getting the people? What else do you need to think about?
So I think some of the things that made our group really great is that we all had different strengths. And so our constituent group, we didn't really know each other beforehand. So we all came in with very different experiences, very, very different. Some people were very connected with the public. We had some of our pictures were taken by one of the girls in our group is a photographer. And so she had media campaigns to kind of bring the community to us, kind of put out the needs and have those needs met by the larger community. I had some experience with welcoming refugees as far as the paperwork and the necessities that need to be done with healthcare and some of the logistics of that. We had people that had the time and the availability to come over and actually be present and help take them to appointments. And then we had financial sponsors. They didn't have as much of the time, or they weren't in the city as much, but they were able to support us in so many ways financially, with fundraising for a car, for school, to further education. So we had all these strengths in different ways. And we also situated them very carefully into a neighborhood where people were really excited to have them and support them, whether it was in the schools or in the community with the garden associations. And the school was just incredible too.
Yeah.
So all of those
We saw lucky.
factors were so important.
That's great. Thanks. Yeah, like so many things to consider that you might not think about in advance, that just
And a really diverse group, like not trying to limit your constituent group to one group of people, whether it's from the same neighborhood organization or whatever. Just having different people made this so much more successful.
Different strengths. And then that's just such a beautiful picture of identifying people's strengths and identifying the strengths, the diversity, and the strength in that diversity. Can I go to Nadine and just ask, so before we started, we met your son, who is pretty excited about school ending in just a couple weeks. And so I think as a mom, I think about what maybe some of the joys and challenges are. You were living in a camp, in a tent with your kids, you know, maybe dreaming about something else for them. For you as a mom, what were some of the surprises that you discovered as a newcomer to Canada with your kids and maybe as a mom?
Like I'm surprised how much how much fast my kids, they got the language here, like before us, because you know English is second language for us, and when we came here, I don't know anything in English, just started here. Yeah, my kids like us the language like in faster than us, and now my kids like with the accent, they talk with the Canadian accent, like.
We were like worried about the kids, and then the kids catch the language before us.
Even the baby.
Yeah, even the babies.
Yeah.
Even
Yeah, kids are so resilient, aren't they? So that's kind of a gift to us as parents, that the kids are resilient. Moses, I want to go back to you a little bit, and can you talk to us just a little bit about what the bigger picture for MCC is? Going back to that video that we watched at the beginning, where there's the journey of migration, the journey of displacement is so huge. And like we said at the beginning, this journey of resettlement in Canada through refugee sponsorship is a small slice of that really, really large reality. Can you talk us through maybe some of the factors and some of the ways that MCC is working at that, maybe on a bigger picture level, a global level?
Yeah, absolutely. Our theme is migration and resettlement. And when we look at the issues of the displaced people through this lens of migration and resettlement, and when we take the refugee population as an example here, refugees become refugees because they've been forced to flee from their country for a number of reasons. It could be a conflict, it could be persecution, it could be human rights abuses, or other forms of injustices that have caused them to leave their country. The moment they leave their country, they flee to a neighboring country. Here, let us take Lebanon, and then let us work with Syria as a case study here. So once they flee, the United Nations High Commission for Refugees has identified 3 durable solutions One is, once the situation that forced the refugees to flee their home cools down or ends, then the refugees can return home. This becomes what we call voluntary repatriation.
Right, like the
But-
war ends or the conflict ends or something.
All right. But at that time, when they fled from Syria into Lebanon, MCC is there on the ground working with partners to support those refugees. We supported them through a number of programs. We provide some psychosocial support. Food vouchers are provided to some of those refugees. Programs in counseling through the work of partners there. And yeah, even MCC ships material aid, things like blankets, to help those refugees there in between that period. So as the conflict in Syria, we can still stay with Syria, continues, now these refugees are in Lebanon. What happens to them if they can't go back? As MCC is working with the partners there and supporting the partners there, options that are being explored is, what opportunities do they have in Lebanon? Can they find work? Can they send their children to school? Do they have that freedom of movement? In other countries, they can find opportunities like those. I was in Lebanon in 2016, I believe, and I know the situation there is a little bit different, but in other countries in the world, there are some of those opportunities that refugees can access education, they do have access to certain rights in the country, and they can live there before they return back to their country. So and then that becomes what we call local integration. They find a way of locally integrating into that community and living their lives, though at times they don't have permanent residence. So in our work with resettlement, we look at all those options. Can these refugees go back home? If they can't go back home, then what are the options for them? And MCC International is also there in supporting those refugees in this in-between period as they are in those countries in exile. For the few of them who cannot either go back home or who cannot settle in the country in which they have fled to, we come in with the resettlement program, and this is a protection program, and it is really a program for the most vulnerable. And this is a word that is very difficult for me to define, knowing that the refugees and the situations in which they are equally difficult. So how do we pick and choose who is the most vulnerable of the vulnerable is a huge challenge. So for us and with the program that resettles, only 1% of the world refugees, looking at a number of 20.4 million refugees today, only 1% of them get resettled around the world. It is a difficult decision to make, but a small program, very impactful, helps in so many ways. So those few that are selected either through the government program or through the blended visa office program or through the named sponsorship program, then come to Canada under that protection mechanism of the United Nations High Commission for Refugees. So in all these stages, MCC is involved in supporting the refugees, either with their local integration or with their voluntary repatriation, should they choose to go back, or to assist those few who are the most vulnerable with resettlement to Canada. So our programs complement each other in so many ways and at those different levels to ensure that MCC is holistic in its approach to the refugee crisis of the world.
Mm. Thank you. That's like such a beautiful picture of all the places where MCC is getting involved. Again, like we said in that video, welcoming the stranger during all parts of their journey, which looks so different. Khalil, I just want to come back to you. again, Moses outlined this incredibly long and incredibly challenging journey. And you finally arrive in Canada. And one of the things that Moses said, or Moses quoted one of Arla, I think, in what she felt as a sponsoring person and part of a sponsorship group, was that one of the main tasks was to help restore dignity, because sometimes we look at it, it's World Refugee Day, you say, oh, you know, you're so happy to be in Canada, but coming to Canada and that first day you arrive may not be the happiest day of your life, knowing there's so many things you've left behind. So can you talk a little bit about how relationship building has happened with your sponsorship groups? You talked about the one gentleman who helped you build your greenhouse, and you call him dad, and the kids call him grandpa. How did those relationships develop when there was probably so many emotions to work through and so many feelings to work through? How do those relationships grow and build over time?
Yeah, first of all, when I came to Canada, when I arrived to Canada, and was I mean, like the first or the first couple weeks were not easy for me and for my kids, for my wife. Yeah, and because, as you know, we have nothing to do, just like staying inside. We don't know where we can go. Sometimes, like after like the visiting of my sponsor, like always like visited us, but yeah, they visit us a lot, and then but they cannot stay with us for a long time. And then my wife, she said, let's go outside. And then I told her where and then why, and then, you know, because the first part was the languages, and was, yeah, and then
After that, our sponsorship like start like help us like go with we went with them to the mountain, to everywhere here in Canada, and they help us too much, and they are friendly like our family now, you know.
yeah, because I left my family, and Nadine, she left her family in the camp, and I left my friends, my brothers, they still in the camp, my wife, my brother and my mothers. And then that they said we are living the life, new life, so the new life. And then they helped us a lot of like in doing appointment, in doing the health card, and for me and my kids, and do all the, they did all the appointments. They help us for to do all the appointments. And then, yeah, from that, the relation, like getting like strength, and then building day after day after day. And then they are very close to us now, and then we cannot like live a week or without them. And then, yeah, I always text Rihanna, come in, and text my dad, my Canadian dad, my Canadian mom, please, we miss you for 3 days, or come and visit, come and drink Arabic coffee. Yeah.
And I tried to explain to Khalil too, like normally, and this has been a big shock for me too, is because we're very independent culture here. We're very isolated, I guess. Sometimes we don't even have people over to our homes, and then to be invited over for meals and coming over all the time and dropping over unannounced, and it was so different. But it's kind of an adaptation we've made that I think we've embraced.
Yeah.
And yeah.
That's great. And again, maybe one of the surprises on both sides, right?
Yeah.
Where you find family in a new home, and you experience family Rihanna in a new way that maybe it's not very typical for Canadians to experience that way. So we're at the top of the hour, friends, and I feel like this has been a very, very rich conversation, and I really want to say a huge thank you to all of our participants, those who have shared their stories, shared from their hearts, shared from their experience. Thank you so very much. I want to thank every one of you who has attended this and listened, submitted questions, and continues to support and walk along MCC, walk walk alongside MCC in this journey. It's beautiful and it's so enriching. So we are so grateful. Want to invite you, if you're interested to know more, we have a podcast. It's called Relief, Development, and Podcast. You can find it wherever you find your podcasts. And there are several episodes where we explore these types of conversations about migration and newcomers and refugee resettlement and about welcoming the stranger. So would commend you to have a listen to that. Thank you again for joining us on this virtual visit, and I hope you have a wonderful evening. Happy World Refugee Day. Thank you to everyone.